My name is Alana Monroe, 29 years old, and I once knelt on cold marble floors, scrubbing mud stains in the Whitmore estate. The click of high heels echoed above me, where million-dollar deals were struck as if I were invisible. I believed that silence and devotion would earn me respect, but I was wrong. At a charity auction, crystal chandeliers glittered over hundreds of tailored suits and silk gowns, and Evelyn Whitmore raised her champagne glass, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. She can scrub floors, but don't expect her in the boardroom. Laughter and applause rolled through the room like thunder, crashing over me. I clutched my cleaning rag, the sharp scent of bleach rising around me, and made a silent vow. One day, I would make decisions that would bring the entire Whitmore dynasty to its knees. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when I believed hard work could rewrite your story, that dedication carved pathways to dignity. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where my mother cleaned houses and my father fixed cars in a garage that smelled of oil and rust. They taught me that honest labor was honorable, that no job was beneath you if it fed your family. When they died in a highway accident during my senior year of college, I was left with nothing but student debt and a degree in economics that felt as useful as paper in the rain. The scholarship money dried up. The part-time jobs barely covered rent. I couldn't finish my last semester, so I did what survival required. I found work where I could. The Whitmore estate sat on 20 acres of manicured lawns and towering oak trees in upstate New York, a monument to wealth so old it had forgotten its own origins. The family made their fortune in shipping and real estate, then diversified into tech and green energy. By the time I arrived, they were American royalty, untouchable, unaccountable, utterly convinced of their own superiority. I was hired as part of the household staff, one of a dozen faceless workers who kept the machinery of their lives running smoothly. My job was simple: clean, serve, disappear. At first, I told myself it was temporary. I would save money, finish my degree, move on. But months became years, and the weight of invisibility settled into my bones like frost. I scrubbed bathrooms where the fixtures cost more than my annual salary. I served dinners where they discussed mergers and acquisitions while I refilled wine glasses, my presence noted only when I was too slow or made too much noise. They spoke around me, through me, as if I were a piece of furniture that happened to move. Evelyn Whitmore was the matriarch, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair styled into a perfect chignon and eyes like polished stone. She ran the Whitmore group with an iron fist wrapped in Chanel, demanding absolute loyalty and offering nothing in return but the privilege of proximity to power. Her husband, Richard Whitmore, was quieter, a man who had learned long ago that his wife's ambition eclipsed his own. Their son, Zachary, was different, or so I thought. Zach was 31, tall and lean with dark hair that always looked slightly disheveled, as if he'd just run his hands through it in frustration. He had his mother's sharp intelligence but none of her cruelty, or so it seemed in those early days. He noticed me in a way the others didn't, not as a servant, but as a person. He asked my name. He smiled when I brought him coffee in the morning. He asked about my day, my life, my dreams, and I, foolish and starving for kindness, let myself believe it meant something. We started talking in the kitchen late at night when the rest of the house was asleep. He told me about the pressure of being a Whitmore, the expectations that crushed him, the life mapped out before he was born. I told him about my parents, my unfinished degree, the feeling of being stuck in a life I never chose. He listened. He saw me. And slowly, carefully, we fell into something that felt like love. For 6 months, we existed in stolen moments, midnight conversations, secret touches in empty hallways, whispered promises that felt like lifelines. He said he loved me. He said we would find a way. He said his family didn't define him. I believed every word because I needed to, because the alternative was unbearable. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was a Friday in late autumn, the air outside crisp and smelling of wood smoke. The Whitmores were hosting a dinner party for investors, and the house buzzed with the low hum of money and power. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, pouring drinks, clearing plates, invisible once again. Zach caught my eye across the dining room and smiled, that small, private smile that was meant only for me. My heart lifted. I thought we had a future. After the guests left, I was cleaning up in the kitchen when Evelyn appeared in the doorway. She was still dressed in her evening gown, diamonds glinting at her throat. She watched me for a moment, her expression unreadable, and then she spoke. "I know about you and Zachary," she said, her voice calm and cold as winter steel. My hands froze over the sink. Water dripped from the dish I was holding. I turned slowly, searching for the right words, but she raised one hand to silence me. "Don't bother denying it," she continued. "I've known for weeks, and I want you to understand something, Alana. My son will marry someone from our world, someone who can stand beside him without embarrassment, someone with a name, a family, a future that complements ours. You are none of those things." The words hit like stones. I wanted to argue, to tell her that love didn't care about class or bloodlines, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't angry. She was simply stating a fact, as if explaining the weather. "You will leave this house by the end of the week," she said. "I'll give you 2 months' severance. Consider it a gift. And if you ever contact my son again, I will make sure you never work in this city, or any city, again. Do we understand each other?" I nodded because I couldn't speak. She turned and left, her heels clicking away down the marble hallway. I stood there trembling, the dish still in my hands, and waited for Zach to come find me, to tell me his mother was wrong, to fight for us. He never came. The next morning, I packed my things in silence. The other staff members avoided my eyes, as if failure were contagious. I left through the service entrance, the same door I'd used every day for 2 years, and walked down the long driveway without looking back. My phone stayed silent. No call, no text, no explanation, just the crushing weight of abandonment. I moved back to Ohio, to a town that felt smaller and grayer than I remembered. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat and took a job waiting tables at a diner where the coffee was weak and the tips were worse. At night, I lay awake and replayed every conversation, every promise, every moment I'd let myself believe I mattered. The anger came slowly, like a fire smoldering beneath ash. It started as hurt, then hardened into something sharper, something that wouldn't let me rest. I thought about Evelyn's words constantly. "You are none of those things. Not the right name, not the right family, not worthy of a seat at the table." And I realized something. She was right. I wasn't any of those things. Not yet. But I could be. I spent my days serving eggs and wiping down counters, but my nights belonged to something else. I enrolled in online courses, finishing my economics degree one class at a time. I read everything I could find about business, investing, market strategy. I saved every cent I earned, living on rice and instant noodles, walking instead of taking the bus. I learned to code. I taught myself financial modeling. I networked obsessively, reaching out to anyone who might give me a foothold, a chance, a sliver of opportunity. And then, 18 months after leaving the Whitmore estate, I got my break. A small startup in Cleveland was looking for an analyst. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was a door, and I kicked it open. I worked 16-hour days, proving myself with every spreadsheet. every projection, every late-night strategy session. Within 6 months, I was promoted. Within a year, I was leading a team. The company grew, and so did I. I learned how power worked, not through birthright, but through intelligence, ruthlessness, and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. 3 years later, I launched my own firm, Monroe Empire. It started small, consulting for mid-sized companies, but I was hungry in a way that old money could never understand. I didn't just want success. I wanted vindication. I wanted to stand in rooms where people like Evelyn Whitmore held court and make them remember my name. And slowly, steadily, I built an empire on the ashes of my humiliation. But I never forgot. Not the marble floors, not the champagne glass raised in mockery, not the way Zach's silence had cut deeper than any words. I carried it all with me, a stone in my chest that grew heavier with every success, every victory, every step closer to the moment I knew was coming, the moment I would walk back into their world, not as a servant, but as a queen. By the time I turned 28, Monroe Empire was no longer a startup. We had offices in 3 cities, a portfolio of clients that read like a Fortune 500 directory, and a reputation for turning struggling companies into profit machines. The press called me a wunderkind, a maverick, a force of nature. They didn't know that every deal I closed, every company I saved, was a brick in the fortress I was building around myself. They didn't know I was preparing for war. The turning point came at a global business summit in Chicago. I was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on corporate restructuring, a topic I knew intimately because I'd spent the last 5 years dissecting how old money empires crumbled under their own arrogance. The conference was held at the Drake Hotel, a sprawling monument to luxury where chandeliers dripped crystal and the carpets swallowed sound. As I stood backstage, adjusting my microphone, I heard a name that made my blood freeze. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard and Evelyn Whitmore of the Whitmore Group. Applause rippled through the ballroom. I peered through the curtain and saw them. Evelyn in a navy gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richard beside her with the same tired smile he'd worn for decades. They moved through the crowd like royalty, shaking hands, accepting praise, utterly confident in their place at the top of the world. And then I saw Zach. He looked older, sharper, his boyish uncertainty replaced by the polished veneer of inherited power. He was speaking to a Bloomberg reporter, gesturing with one hand, his wedding ring catching the light. Married. Of course. To someone appropriate, someone with the right last name and the right pedigree, someone who wasn't me. The anger I'd been nursing for years surged white-hot through my veins. I stepped onto that stage not as Alana Monroe, the former housemaid, but as Alana Monroe, the CEO, the woman who had clawed her way out of invisibility and into the spotlight they thought belonged to them alone. The speech I gave that day wasn't the one I'd prepared. I spoke about second chances, about how the people society discards are often the ones who rebuild it. I talked about the myth of meritocracy, how power protects itself by convincing the powerless they deserve their place at the bottom. And I looked directly at the Whitmore family as I said it. The room erupted in applause. Flash photography turned the air into lightning. Richard's face went pale. Evelyn's expression remained perfectly composed, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes the moment she realized who I was. Zach stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. After the speech, I was swarmed by reporters, investors, executives who wanted to shake my hand and talk about partnerships. I smiled, answered questions, played the role of the gracious victor. But my eyes kept drifting back to the Whitmores, watching them retreat to the edges of the ballroom, their kingdom suddenly smaller. That night, in the elevator of the hotel, Evelyn and I ended up alone. The doors slid shut. sealing us in a small golden box 30 floors above the city. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned to me, her face a mask of cold disdain. "Impressive performance," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "But you're still just a maid in an expensive dress." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "The difference, Evelyn, is that now I'm the one who pays for the floors you're standing on." The elevator doors opened. She stepped out without another word, but I saw the tremor in her hands, the crack in her armor. I had drawn first blood. Over the next 6 months, I watched the Whitmore group from a distance, the way a predator watches wounded prey. And they were wounded. Badly. A series of poor investments, combined with changing markets and management missteps, had left them hemorrhaging money. Their stock price plummeted. Creditors started circling. The press, which had once fawned over them, now ran exposés about their outdated business model and questionable ethics. They were dying, and I was the only one who could save them. But I wasn't going to make it easy. I hired the best corporate lawyers in the country, the kind who could find loopholes in contracts written by God himself. I instructed my team to compile every piece of financial data we could find on the Whitmore Group: balance sheets, tax returns, debt obligations, hidden liabilities. I wanted to know every weakness, every vulnerable point, every place where pressure could be applied. Then I waited. The call came on a rainy Tuesday in October. My assistant buzzed through to say that Richard Whitmore was on the line, requesting a meeting. I let him wait for 5 minutes before I picked up, savoring the knowledge that he was sitting somewhere, sweating, rehearsing what he would say to me. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause. Then, in a voice that sounded like it cost him everything, he said, "We need to talk about a partnership." Partnership. The word was laughable. They didn't want a partnership. They wanted a bailout, a lifeline, a miracle. And I was the only one who could provide it. "I'm listening," I said. "Not over the phone," he replied. "Can we meet, face to face?" I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of his desperation. Then I said, "I'll have my assistant send you my availability." 2 weeks later, they came to my office. Not their lawyers, not their advisors, but Richard and Evelyn themselves. That told me everything I needed to know about how dire their situation was. They arrived in a black town car, dressed like they were attending a funeral, which in a way they were. The funeral of their empire. My office was on the 52nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a throne room. I had decorated it deliberately, minimalist, modern, every surface polished to a mirror shine. It was a space designed to intimidate, to remind visitors that they were standing in someone else's kingdom now. When they walked in, I was seated behind my desk, reviewing a contract. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I let them wait. Finally, I looked up. "Please, sit." They sat. Richard's hands were folded in his lap like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Evelyn's back was ramrod straight, her face a stone mask, but I could see the fear lurking beneath it. "You're in trouble," I said simply. Richard nodded. "We've hit some rough patches, yes, but the company is fundamentally sound. We just need some short-term capital to stabilize." "You're bleeding out," I interrupted. "Your debt-to-equity ratio is a disaster. Your revenue is down 40% year over year. You're 6 months away from bankruptcy, maybe less." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We didn't come here to be lectured." "Then why did you come?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Richard cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer you a significant stake in the Whitmore Group in exchange for an infusion of capital. 20% equity, a seat on the board. 60%, I said. The room went silent. Richard blinked. I'm sorry? 60% equity. Full operational control. Every major decision goes through me. In exchange, I'll inject enough capital to stabilize your operations and restructure your debt. Richard's face turned red. That's absurd. You're asking us to hand over. I'm not asking, I said, my voice calm and cold as winter. I'm offering. Take it or leave it. Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is extortion. No, I said, standing to meet her gaze. This is business. You taught me that, remember? You taught me that power isn't given, it's taken. That the weak don't deserve a seat at the table. Well, congratulations, Evelyn. You taught me so well that now I'm the one setting the terms. She stared at me, her face white with fury. For a moment, I thought she might slap me. Instead, she turned and walked toward the door. We'll find another way, she said. No, you won't, I replied. I've already made sure of that. Every bank, every investor you might approach has been briefed on your situation. They know you're toxic. I'm your only option. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. Richard looked between us, his expression helpless. Think about it, I said. You have 72 hours. After that, the offer expires, and you can watch your legacy crumble from the sidelines. They left without another word. I stood at the window and watched their car pull away, disappearing into the river of traffic below. My heart was pounding, adrenaline singing through my veins. This was it. The moment I had spent years preparing for. The moment they would finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. 72 hours later, Richard Whitmore called and accepted my terms. The day the contracts were signed, I wore white. Not cream, not ivory, but stark, blinding white. A Dior suit that cost more than I used to make in a year. I wanted them to see me as something pure, something untouchable, something that had risen from the ashes of their cruelty and emerged as something they could never diminish again. The signing took place in the Whitmore Group's main conference room, the same room where Evelyn had once hosted board meetings while I refilled coffee cups and kept my eyes lowered. Now I sat at the head of the table, flanked by my legal team, while the Whitmores sat across from me like defendants awaiting sentencing. The lawyers shuffled papers, pens scratched across dotted lines, and with each signature, the power shifted irrevocably into my hands. Richard signed first, his hand trembling slightly. Evelyn signed last, pressing the pen so hard against the paper that I thought it might tear. When it was done, I stood and extended my hand. Congratulations, I said. We're partners now. Evelyn didn't take my hand. She simply gathered her things and left, her heels clicking down the hallway like a death knell. Richard lingered, his face gray and defeated. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and followed his wife out the door. Only Zach remained, standing by the window, staring out at the city as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Alana, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Whitmore, I replied, keeping my tone professional, distant. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. I wanted to call you. After you left, I wanted to... But you didn't, I interrupted. You chose comfort over courage. You chose your mother's approval over your own voice. And now you get to live with that choice. I was a coward, he said. I know that, and I'm sorry. Your apology is 5 years too late, I said, and it's worthless. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. What happens now? Now? I walked to the window and stood beside him, looking out at the skyline. Now I rebuild this company from the ground up. I cut the dead weight, streamline operations, and turn the Whitmore Group into something profitable again. And you, Zach, you get to stay on as VP of Operations, because despite everything, you're good at your job. And my mother? Evelyn will remain on the board in an advisory capacity, I said, but she has no voting power, no veto rights, no authority. She'll watch from the sidelines while I make every decision she once would have made herself. She'll see her empire reshaped in my image, and there's nothing she can do to stop it. Zach's jaw tightened. You're punishing her. No, I said. I'm teaching her. There's a difference. He left without another word, and I stood alone in that conference room, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket. I had won. The war was over. But victory tasted strange. Not sweet, not bitter, just empty. The restructuring began immediately. I brought in my own team, people I trusted, people who had bled for their positions the way I had. We gutted the old hierarchies, eliminated redundancies, renegotiated contracts, and pulled the company back from the brink of collapse. It was brutal work, the kind that left no room for sentiment or mercy. Every decision was calculated, every move designed to maximize efficiency and profit. Evelyn fought me at every turn. She called emergency board meetings, filed complaints, tried to rally shareholders to her side. But I had anticipated every move, blocked every avenue of escape. The board voted with me. The shareholders trusted me. And slowly, painfully, Evelyn Whitmore learned what it felt like to be irrelevant. 6 months into the restructuring, I called a company-wide meeting. Employees filled the main auditorium, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. I stood on the stage where Evelyn had once delivered speeches about legacy and tradition, and I told them the truth. This company was dying, I said. Not because of the market, not because of bad luck. It was dying because the people in charge believed their last name was enough. They believed that power, once earned by their ancestors, would sustain them forever. They were wrong. I paused, letting the words sink in. We are not defined by where we come from. We are defined by what we do with the opportunities we're given. Some of you started in the mailroom. Some of you came from Ivy League schools. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you show up, you work hard, and you prove that you belong here every single day. That's the new Whitmore Group. That's the company I'm building. And if you're willing to work for it, you'll have a seat at this table. The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. I saw people crying, saw hope rekindling in eyes that had been dimmed by years of stagnation and elitism. And in the back of the room, I saw Evelyn, standing alone, her face expressionless. After the meeting, she approached me in the hallway. We stood facing each other, two women who had been locked in battle for what felt like a lifetime. You've won, she said, her voice flat. Are you satisfied? No, I said, because this was never about winning. It was about being seen. And now that you are, she asked, what comes next? I thought about the girl who had scrubbed floors and dreamed of escape. I thought about the woman who had clawed her way out of invisibility and into a position of power, and I realized that revenge, for all its allure, was a hollow prize. Now, I said, I build something better. Not for you, not even for me, for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Evelyn studied me for a long moment. You've changed, she said. No, I replied. I've just stopped pretending to be small to make you comfortable. She nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. I never saw her in the office again. She retired quietly a month later, issuing a brief statement about spending more time with family. The press barely noticed. The world moved on, but I didn't. The Whitmore Group flourished under my leadership. Within 2 years, we had tripled our revenue, expanded into new markets, and earned a reputation as one of the most innovative companies in the industry. The press called it a miracle. I called it inevitable. And then came the night that closed the final chapter. It was a corporate gala, one of those black tie affairs where Manhattan's elite gathered to see and be seen. I attended alone, dressed in an emerald gown that caught the light like liquid fire. As I moved through the crowd, shaking hands and making small talk, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and found myself face to face with Zach. He looked older, tired, the weight of his choices etched into the lines around his eyes. Beside him stood a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, polished, perfectly acceptable. "Alana," he said, "I wanted to introduce you to my wife, Catherine." Catherine extended her hand, smiling politely. "It's an honor to meet you. Zach talks about you often." "Does he?" I said, shaking her hand. Zach's face colored. "I was just telling Catherine about the incredible work you've done with the company. You've accomplished something truly remarkable." "Thank you," I said, "but I didn't do it for you." The words hung in the air between us. Catherine glanced at her husband, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Zach swallowed hard. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man I had loved, but a stranger wearing his face. The anger that had sustained me for so long drained away, leaving only pity. "I forgive you," I said. His eyes widened. "You do?" "Yes," I said, "because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. You made your choice, Zach. You chose safety over love, and you have to live with that. But I don't. Not anymore." Before he could respond, I felt a hand on my elbow. I turned to see Nathan Cross, a venture capitalist I'd been seeing for the past 6 months. He was tall, confident, with kind eyes and a smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. "Sorry to interrupt," Nathan said, extending his hand to Zach. "Nathan Cross. I'm Alana's fiancé." The word, fiancé, landed like a bomb. Zach's face went white. His eyes dropped to my left hand, where a diamond ring glinted under the chandeliers, a ring I'd been wearing for 2 weeks, but hadn't announced publicly. "Congratulations," Zach managed, his voice hollow. "Thank you," I said, lacing my fingers through Nathan's. "We're very happy." Catherine beamed. "How wonderful! When's the wedding?" "Spring," Nathan replied, pulling me close. "We're thinking something small, intimate, just the people who matter." Zach nodded mechanically, his gaze fixed on the ring. That's great. Really, I'm happy for you." But his voice said otherwise. It said regret, longing, the terrible understanding that he had let something precious slip through his fingers, and now it was too late to get it back. "We should go," Catherine said, sensing her husband's distress. "It was lovely meeting you, Alana." "You too," I said. They left, disappearing into the crowd. Nathan turned to me, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm perfect," I said. And I meant it, because standing there, in that glittering ballroom, with a man who loved me for who I was, rather than what I could be molded into, I realized something. I had spent years trying to prove I was worthy of a world that had rejected me. But the truth was, that world was never worthy of me. I had built an empire not to earn their respect, but to prove to myself that I didn't need it. And in doing so, I had become something they could never take away, someone who defined her own value. The gala continued around us, champagne flowing and laughter rising like music. Nathan leaned down and whispered, "Want to get out of here?" "God, yes," I said, laughing. We left through the main entrance, not the service door. not the back exit, but through the front, where photographers' flashes lit up the night like stars. Tomorrow, the pictures would be everywhere. Alana Monroe, CEO of the Whitmore Group, stepping out with her fiancé, radiant and unbothered, a woman who had rewritten her own story and stepped into the role she had always deserved. As we drove away, I looked back at the building one last time, at the glowing windows and the silhouettes of people who would spend the rest of the night pretending they had always believed in me. And I smiled, because I knew the truth. I didn't need their belief. I never had. I had my own. 5 years have passed since that night. The Whitmore Group, now rebranded as Monroe Whitmore Industries, is one of the most successful companies in the country. We employ thousands of people, many of whom started where I did. At the bottom, invisible, hungry for a chance to prove themselves. I established a scholarship fund for students who can't afford to finish their degrees. I created mentorship programs for young women entering male-dominated industries. I speak at conferences not about revenge, but about resilience, about how the only person who can define your worth is you. Evelyn Whitmore lives quietly now, in a smaller house upstate. We exchange Christmas cards, but little else. Richard passed away 2 years ago. Zach runs a nonprofit, focused on education reform. We're cordial when our paths cross, but the past stays where it belongs, behind us. Nathan and I got married in a garden ceremony, surrounded by people who loved us, not because of our names or our wealth, but because of who we were. We're expecting our first child in the spring. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the girl who scrubbed floors and believed hard work would be enough. I think about the woman who clawed her way out of invisibility and into power. And I think about the lesson I learned the hard way. No one can make you invisible unless you let them. I am Alana Monroe. I am a daughter, a CEO, a wife, a friend, and I will never, ever bow again. If you've ever been told you're not enough, not smart enough, not polished enough, not born into the right family, I want you to hear this. They're wrong. Your worth isn't determined by the people who overlook you. It's not measured by the rooms you're excluded from or the tables where no seat is saved. Your worth is something you carry within you, something that cannot be taken away by cruelty or indifference. I spent years trying to earn respect from people who were incapable of giving it. And in the process, I almost lost myself. But I learned that true power doesn't come from forcing others to see you. It comes from seeing yourself clearly, from knowing your value even when the world refuses to acknowledge it. Revenge is seductive. It promises closure, satisfaction, justice. But real victory isn't about bringing others down. It's about lifting yourself up so high that their opinions no longer reach you. So if you're standing where I once stood, on your knees, scrubbing floors, watching the world happen above your head, know this: you have the power to rise. Not because someone gave you permission, but because you decided you deserved it. Don't wait for an invitation. Don't wait for approval. Build your own table. Claim your own seat. And when they finally look up and see you, smile, because you've already won. This is my story, but it doesn't end here. There are millions of women and men out there who have been told they don't belong, who have been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And the world needs to hear it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible or powerless, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below. Tell me how you rose from the ashes. Tell me how you reclaimed your power. Because every story of resilience is an act of rebellion against the systems that try to keep us small. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's struggling to find their voice, someone who's forgotten their worth, Share this video with them. Let them know they're not alone. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of triumph, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of people who refuse to stay down. Because we're just getting started. Together, we rise.